Welcome to another episode of Distory. My name is Kirk from walruscarp.com, and with me, as always, is Kate, the amazing Kungaloosh. How we doing, Disney Cicerone, tonight?
I'm doing really great. I'm actually super excited for this episode because we have, I feel like I say that every episode. I got to start saying something else. I am excited for this episode, but I got to start saying something else. But no, I really am, though, because I found some things. I found a few things that I'm very excited to share.
I know you texted me and I was enthralled, but yet I didn't. I was like, I don't know what she's talking about, so I can't comment.
Yeah. So what we are going to be talking about tonight, we already finished up our Jungle Cruise jokes, like mini series within our series. So I know, but I mean, I think we still have a few more to share. So the jokes keep coming. Don't worry. But we are going to move now scene by scene through the Jungle Cruise. And we're going to do it in a way that it's from the time when Marc Davis steps into the picture and then like beyond that. So because we've already talked a lot about previous to that, especially with the jokes and stuff. So that's where we're going to start tonight.
Yeah. Marc Davis brings the funny, you know?
He does. Mm-hmm.
So, you know what? You made such a lovely outline. I'm going to just preface your lovely outline. And then I feel like you probably have some amazing quote and I have some quotes. But let's start off with why on earth did our true life adventure go from less intellectually stimulating to a more humorous plussing by Mr. Marc Davis?
Yeah. Well, do you want to start? You want me to go?
I want you to go, dude, because
okay.
This might be like your big reveal.
Oh, no. Well, this isn't my biggest reveal, but it's one of them. Cool. So, why did the Jungle Cruise change? So we all knew that it was a little bit dry based on our previous episodes.
No, it wasn't. It's on water. What are you talking about?
No. It was the script was a little dry. It wasn't, there was not a lot of humor in it. Stop. I have to do the professional thing now.
You are professional. Keep going.
So this all started when Walt was standing in front of the Jungle Cruise and he overheard a guest remark, "We don't need to go on this ride. We've already seen it." This is actually the birthplace of plussing, if you've ever heard that term in Disney, which is basically adding a little more, making it a little better, doing something a little different. So Walt said, we can't be satisfied, even though we'll get the crowds. We've always got to give them a little more. It will be worth the investment. If they ever stop coming, it'll cost 10 times that much to get them back. Whenever I go on a ride, I'm always thinking of what's wrong with the thing and how it can be improved. So that's kind of the main reason where he's hearing these people say, we don't need to go back on it. We've already seen it. And he's like, wait a minute. Okay. So Walt Disney said, it's the same basic ride, but because I found that the ride itself had basic appeal, but I had to give the excitement. In other words, we plussed this with what we know today against what we knew when we started. I've been adding to that as I went along, and I'm going to redo that in about a year. By redoing it, I'll add a lot of new animals and new areas and make it more exciting, but it's still a very good ride. So he defends like his original work, but he's like, let's make it a little more exciting. Let's give the public a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, which is crazy, right? Like you're taking something that was already great and making it enhanced in some form or fashion. So it really kind of starts with this attraction in one form or another. And actually, Marc Davis kind of gets pulled into a lot of different projects. But basically what I wrote down as like a summary is he wanted to create more like playfulness and lightheartedness atmosphere to the Jungle Cruise, which could have been a much more stark contrast to some of the thrilling attractions that they had at Disneyland. So eventually we do get more of his slapstick gags and puns, kind of physical humor written in, even before, as you know from the last episode with the scripts, we really don't see that even in the 50s. We certainly don't see it. There's only one joke. In the 60s, we start to see a few, but it's not really until the 70s that we start hitting what I would consider more of the humor driven by the Skipper's approach. But the scenes had some of this humor already written into it. So I do have a quote from Marc Davis that I found as well that I thought.
Before you get to that quote, can I back up just a little bit?
Back it up.
Okay, so how does Marc Davis get into this picture? I think that's really important to know how he got here, because he wasn't originally working in Disneyland. That was not a thing he did. He was an animator at Walt Disney Studios. So he was feeling a little bit disenchanted by the studios because he had pitched this entire movie, which I thought I had the picture on my thing, but I'm not. I'm going to lift up the book. Brace yourself, kids. So he had worked on a pitch for a movie that was called Chanticleer. And it was about this rooster who believed that his crowing was what made the sun rise. So it's kind of this.
Hang on. Rooster, keep that rooster up there. Keep that rooster up.
Okay.
I know.
Heavy book.
Is anybody making any connections with where this rooster actually shows up? We do get them.
Yeah, we do. We do get bits and pieces of the story from Robin Hood. That's later on in Robin Hood. They use pieces.
He's so great
of that. But they originally just kind of dismissed this entire thing. Like, he had this entire pitch done, beautiful illustrations, and they're just like, I think they said, what is the thing? You can't make a pleasant character out of a chicken. That's what they told Marc Davis. So he was a little bit frustrated, to say the least, in his job. So he had already done some projects for Disneyland before, so it wasn't like he was totally hands-off for Disneyland, but he'd never been there until the 1960s. So he'd done the Tinkerbell-like figurehead of the Chicken of the Sea pirate boat that used to be in Fantasyland and Disneyland. He also did the backdrop for the Golden Horseshoe. So if you've ever seen that backdrop, he did that as well. So he did a lot of things that ended up in Disneyland, but he never specifically worked on Disneyland because, you know, Walt would like poach people from his animators for projects for WED. That happened all the time in those early years. So Walt was like, hey, like, why don't you come down and work for WED? You know, he could see him being frustrated with his projects. He's like, come on, let's go and visit Disneyland and see what you think. And it wasn't, so before he looked at the Jungle Cruise, he also looked at the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland and how he could possibly add some extra humor there, because it was also fairly dry when it started.
Yes. That attraction was very much, again, like just going through a natural landscape, and honestly, frankly, boring.
Yeah. Well, it was all based on those true life adventure.
Yeah, which are fine,
stories,
but like
so
nobody wants people want the pushing lemmings. They don't want the meandering through a cactus town. You know, they want the action, which is what really happens here.
It's true. And do you want to share your Marc Davis quote?
I do. I actually have a couple, and it's mainly just about, like, I pulled things about his personality, right? Because I think if you understand the man, then you can understand the work, right? So a lot of this comes from, I think humor is very important in anything we do. It's a way of getting the guests relaxed and enjoying themselves. And they had this opportunity to do a lot of silly things on the Jungle Cruise, and it was a lot of fun. I always felt like the Jungle Cruise should be humorous, and that's what makes it different from the true life adventure. And that we had to make it something that people could relate to, something that they could enjoy and laugh at. And having these cartoonish style personalities are one way that they could do that. And I mean, you could see that so much so. There's very few animals that haven't been changed to have some sort of humorous personality or attribute towards them.
Yeah, that's so true. And so when Marc Davis visited Disneyland in the 1960s, he wasn't impressed because everything felt very stale. He basically said, there's a direct quote, there is not enough humor here. He thought it was a what?
I feel like this is how every time you walk into like Disney World and you're like, ugh, this is just, it's fine. It's like, fine. I wish it was Disneyland, but it's fine.
That is kind of how I feel about it.
I do. I know you do.
I'm like, it's just not the same. But
I get it. I totally get it. It's fine. It's okay.
But he said it felt as stale as the most of the world's fairs that lacked a sense of humor. He said, you want to take your family down there and have some fun and be entertained. And humor doesn't hurt anyone. That's a direct Marc Davis quote. He also said, when I started working down there in Disneyland, there was nothing that was funny in any of the attractions I can recollect. this was the thing all the way through that I've tried to do, was to bring humor. I think the Trap Safari was probably the first laugh that Disneyland had in an attraction. So we're thinking Jungle Cruise is really not only the birthplace of plussing, but also birthplace of maybe the first laugh in Disneyland, in all the Disney parks.
Which is crazy to think, because like how serious the parks would have eventually been, you know, in the 50s. But if you look at the environment, you look at the people, I mean, it was a much more serious park than it was in the 60s and 70s, certainly in the 70s.
Yeah,
the 50s,
sure.
like just look at the attire. I mean, your latest post with the fashion, I mean, it is dramatically different. Nobody's wearing high heels to the parks anymore, or suits.
No, not many suits, that's for sure. Some girls still wear high heels once in a while, but they all change.
Dresses for sure. I think dresses still have, but you know.
I think people wear high heels and then they like just for pictures, and then they go and put them in a locker or something. Like they don't. I've seen people do that. I've contemplated doing that, but I'm like, I don't know. So yeah. And the paper hats, I'll tell you, if we don't get those paper hats someday, I'm going to be so sad.
Just make them yourself.
I thought about making one myself.
Why not make in paper hats?
It can't be that hard. So.
Yeah, and then you could just ship them out to people, and like all they got to do is staple them. You show them where to staple. They can walk around with them.
Oh my gosh. Somebody said that they looked like the little clams from what was in the Carpenter.
They do. They're like little cherubs, you know? It's so funny because, like, I don't know what they cost. They were probably like 10 cents or 20 cents or something, like really affordable. But it was like such a throwaway souvenir, but something that everyone didn't think about because, again, the foliage hadn't really grown in. We talk about the Disney parks being hot, and we had seen in previous episodes of the Jungle Cruise how it was almost barren for a jungle, you know, like because everything was new. It was saplings and bushes but not real giant, huge trees yet. So it's so weird to me. Even when we were doing those vintage recreation photos that you did for your TikTok, that was another one where I couldn't believe how the landscape had changed so much that you couldn't even see different landscapes because it was overgrown now. You know,
I know you're like, well, there's a big tree here. So you can't see anything behind you. It's like we have to move this way. I'm like, that's fine.
That was the Tomorrowland one. The Tomorrowland one had trees all in the front of it.
And the one by Liberty Square too had a big giant tree that wasn't there before. So
yeah, and there was also lanterns and lampposts that didn't exist as well. So yeah, it was wild. Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah. So this idea, Marc Davis is coming in and looking at all the things, and Walt loved the idea of a moving tableau. That was what he called it. Basically, a simple animation, which was something more than you could see at one time, more than you could see in the first pass, so that you would want to come back. So people would be encouraged to come back for a second ride, a third ride, etc. And we see this actually come back in later, because right now, remember, we're the early 60s right now. But we see this come back in later with Pirates of the Caribbean as well, with that whole idea that it was a cocktail party. And you kind of hear there's too much for you to take in one ride. Like I still go on that ride and still find new things. And I've been on it so many times. So this idea that it's all a moving tableau is really what Walt wanted, so that you really can't catch everything in one ride through it. So it encourages multiple rides. So
well, when did Jungle Cruise become an e-ticket? Because originally I found this just great picture just randomly while doing research, you know, because I'm thinking about it, right? Why would anybody want to come back? And I found the ticket booth picture, which I know we had looked at before, but it was a D coupon. It wasn't E. So in my head, it wasn't viewed as a #1 attraction, at least for opening day.
No, it was one of the premier attractions because it was a C ticket first, but they only had A, B, and C to begin with. And then it became
that makes more sense.
And an E. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Yeah. So E became like a top tier. So it was more of like a pricing schedule. So it was only A, B, C first, then they added D, then they added E, or they added D, then E? That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Looking back at my notes. So it was a C coupon ride for 50 cents when it opened. And 50 cents for adults, 35 cents for kids. And then it eventually became a D ticket. And then in 1959 is when it became an E ticket, because that is when they added all of the additions in Tomorrowland. Like we've got the Matterhorn and the submarine rides, and we like the whole addition over there. That's when we finally have the e-ticket.
This is a weird picture then, because it's like this strange time period in between, which is probably only 2 years from being a C transition to a D and then immediately into an E in 59. That's weird.
It all changed really quickly because you remember the ticket books didn't even exist when the parks opened. That wasn't until October of 1955. So a lot of people say it was happened from the beginning. They had ticket books. They did not. You just paid per ride at that point.
So would you transact at each and every attraction?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yes. So you would pay admission to get into the parks. It was $1 to get into the parks, and then you would pay for each individual ride. And they decided, well, let's just sell these ticket books so people don't feel like they're reaching into their pockets every time they want to go on a ride.
That's so true.
Yeah. So that's why that changed. So I got to go back to my notes. I went all the way back to the queue for that one. Because there's some other things from Marc Davis coming in. Admiral Joe Fowler, who we remember of, he did a lot of things, but one of the main things he did was the Mark Twain. He was kind of the military general who really got Disneyland on schedule and opened on time. He could not stand Marc Davis because Marc Davis wanted to change things everywhere he went. He caused like massive changes. So of course that, interrupts operations and it costs more money and all those things. They eventually kind of worked things out, but he was very frustrated, I think, by Marc Davis. But Walt loved him because he knew he was bringing something new into the parks that was really needed. So it was okay. And then I have a really funny situation with Marc Davis where he actually had to direct bulldozers in New Orleans during New Orleans Square. And he said, this was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like this. And having to go down there and help direct people and guide the bulldozers, I almost died. It was an awful experience. And for me, the funny thing, I could read all their faces. Well, here we go again. Walt sent another one of those characters down. When they brought me the bulldozers and I was the man that had been sitting on my hind end for like 25 years as an animator, bringing in the position to direct bulldozers was a little much and frightening as E.T. double hockey sticks. This was a big learning experience for me. So he actually not only designed things for the park, but he was like physically involved with the changes in Disneyland.
Which he clearly did not want to be a part of.
No. He was terrified by it. But you know what? Like we always say, do things that scare you because you'll grow while you do it.
That's where you grow.
That's where you grow.
Or you learn you hate it and never do it again.
That's so true. Oh, gosh.
Some people are asking where are you getting some of these quotes from? Do you want to talk about some of your research points? Because I'm sure you probably have them linked to an Amazon storefront.
Yes. So most of these books that I talk about are in my Amazon storefront. There's a link in my bio for that, and I'll also attach it to the podcast for you guys. But I have several books that I use, plus all the other resources that were direct interviews. The one that we're mainly looking at right now, you saw us lift several times, is this one that's called Marc Davis in His Own Words, Imagineering the Disney Theme Parks. And it's actually a 2-volume set, and it pretty much has every piece of concept art he's ever created. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but it's most of it. It's a ton.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot. And then I also use the Imagineering Story by Leslie Iwerks is a really great resource. Building Disney's Land is one. No, that's not what it's called. It's called Disney's Land.
Yeah.
I think Disney's World is a different book. It's also good, but not this one. Then there's the Disneyland Story by Sam Genoway, and I have a couple other ones, but they're not coming to me at this moment. But it's a lot of different books. They're linked in my storefront if you're interested in checking those out. But
so concept art wise, I'm flipping through here because I just wanted to see if there was redundancy, but I don't think there is. There's this great D23. It's not an interview, but they go through a lot of the concept art for the Jungle Cruise. It's on YouTube. It's a great D23 panel. And there was an elephant graveyard that was in it, and it's not in this at all, which I think is
there is
pretty
a few
cool.
things that I found that are not in here, but it's pretty comprehensive if you love Marc Davis as well.
Yeah. No, it's
awesome.
awesome.
You should start.
Here, I just want to show it to you real quick. I know this is like out of sync, but we are talking about this book, so it's not. But tell me they didn't use any of this in The Lion King. This whole concept of like an elephant
so
graveyard,
like
especially that. Like right there.
Well, and the vultures. We always get the vultures. They're not in Lion King, but the vultures, I tell you, they're they're everywhere in Disney animation. There's always vultures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. So shall we transition to our first stop, which largely is the rainforest. We've already talked a lot about the rainforest in terms of the flowers that were there and things like that. So we won't go over that again, just because we've already talked about that in previous episodes, specifically the episode where we talk about the landscaping, where we went over those. So we're going to more talk about the frogs and the giant butterflies in this area. Depending on which park you're in. We're going to do Disney World and Disneyland kind of simultaneously, so they might be out of sync depending on which ride
where
you're
at.
By.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But we're just, for interest of less confusion, we're just going to link some things together so we can talk about them all at once. So do we want to talk about giant frogs first?
Yeah. Can I do giant frogs?
Yes.
Let me talk about giant books first. So we had talked earlier about this man-eating plant that Marc Davis had originally wanted, and then Kevin Lively ends up putting it in a queue or a reference of that, which, by the way, Kate found something really great that they reused in the queue, that cage, which is pretty sweet. However, we actually get, and this is only in Walt Disney World, are going to be these frogs. And they actually went away for a couple of years, but in 1971, we actually do get an installment of these frogs, and here's the concept art of them as well. But they were going to be, I didn't until this book make the connection that this was originally, because on the very, very bottom of this page, it says giant frogs replace man-eating plants. Jungle River Ride, Walt Disney World, 1970, Walt Disney Productions. Throat puffs up, mouth opens, perhaps light in eyes. So that's... This looks so big.
I know this book is huge.
It's like very cumbersome. But yeah.
See, I've got a picture of the frogs in the ride from 1970s. There's not that many because they weren't there that long. So this is what they look like in the attraction when they were all finished. They were 10 to 14 inches. And I love that everybody in operations basically argued with Marc Davis, saying there's no way that these frogs are real in real life. There's no frogs on Earth that are this large. But Marc said, yes, they're real. They were, in fact, very real. And so Marc told Lee Nestler to fight for the frogs. He said, Lee, I'm going to leave this with you. You've got to maintain our dignity here. We work so hard on all this stuff. You've got to fight for this. And, you know, the funny thing is he is right that the largest frog in the world is the Goliath frog, which grows up to 12.6 inches in Equatorial Guinea. So not quite 14, but still pretty large.
What's the name of the frog? I'll look it up in the meantime.
It's the Goliath frog. Frog. So I actually have a diagram for where these frogs sat in the Jungle Cruise queue, which I think is really fun. So this is like a maintenance diagram. Oh, yeah. Look at it here. I'll pull up the one of the frog. Look at how big that frog is. My goodness. Here. We got big frogs.
Goliath frogs. Real things.
Can you go back to the other one? I like the other one.
You want the one in his hands? This one?
Where he's holding it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of got the same shape.
Mm-hmm. So these frogs were on both sides of the boat. They weren't just on one.
What is this guy doing? He's like swabbing the frog's toes.
I don't know.
What are you doing, guy? What do they do in Equatorial Ghana, man? It's crazy.
So you can see that there's actually frogs on both sides of the river. So what you're looking at here is a maintenance diagram for the Jungle Cruise back in the 1970s. And if you see this oh, I'm on the wrong side. This way. This jagged area here, that is the Inspiration Falls area, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the ones that are circled and the ones that are across the river from there, those are the numbers for the figures. We saw this back in our Haunted Mansion episode when we talked about all of the animated figures have numbers associated with them. Well, that's the same thing with these frogs. So there was frogs on both sides of the river. It's like, there's hardly any pictures that exist of them. This is like a screen grab from a video. Here's the ones that are on the other side from the other ones that I've showed you. And there's, I think, 5. And they were sitting on fiberglass rocks, logs, tree stumps and shells, and the shells then would have a moss and lichen treatment. That's what he wrote in his notes here. And they were referred to in promotional materials as being as big as Boston bulldogs. So that was how they promoted them. Big as your bulldog.
I want that on a shirt.
I know, right? They were removed in 1973 because the park operations vice president at the time, Dick Nunes, ordered them removed because he thought they were hokey. He thought they're kind of stupid. But ironically, the frogs could still be heard after they were removed, just past Inspiration Falls. So they didn't remove the sound for them. They just removed the frogs, which I guess like you can not see frogs and still hear frogs. So it's not that weird, but I don't know why they didn't remove the sounds.
But they did come back. We got them back.
You know, before they had that, they actually came back somewhere else. Do you know where they came back to?
No, where?
They were on the Walt Disney World Railroad, this little baby frog that was up on a stump with alligators surrounding him.
Hang on. We showed that one because that was, you guys have your own version of that, but this is kind of like a makeshift of the bird, right? It's kind of like Walt Disney World's bird.
One.
Which I think is the exact same kind of gag, but yet.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about the hornbill one later, but this is kind of like the gag that they had in Disneyland with alligators or crocodiles surrounding. Yep, just like that. So it was kind of like a makeshift, like, let's just try this out and see if it works. It didn't last very long, and it does not exist anymore. But that's for one of the little frogs one too.
I would actually go on the train if they still had that. This is such a strong opinion. Our train is apart from Frontierland to Fantasyland, the train is completely boring.
There's a better picture of it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So,
see, that should still exist.
A little frog on a log. I guess it's a stump, technically, standing upright. Yeah, I agree. That one just did not last very long, but... And I don't know if I showed you guys this one yet. This is like all 5 of them chilling. It's a terrible picture because there's hardly any pictures that exist. It was 1971 and they only lasted till 1973. And people weren't really taking a lot of pictures of the frogs. They were taking pictures of like the hippos and the flashy African belt. So
is that a giant Goliath frog?
They're like, wait, we got to ride it again. We got to go see the frogs.
I got to pay my 50 cents to see those frogs again.
So yeah, it did come back in 2021, like you said. And you already showed the picture of it, but
yeah,
little froggies, which I think is great. And I feel like I have a note from Kevin Lively about that. So Kevin Lively said, for those wondering about the Jungle Cruise frogs, they were on my wish list for years, but I could never take full credit. As with any successful project, it takes a team. They wouldn't be here without Dave, Chris, Hannah, and everyone else. So he made a tweet about that back in 2021. So thank you, Kevin, for bringing us back not only the man-eating plants, but also the frogs. I'm just so pleased that they're back.
You know what I love about Kevin Lively is the respect for history, tradition, and then resurgence, even if it has to look differently. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So do you have anything more about frogs? Are you ready to mosey on down the river?
I don't. We can croak our way to the next one.
Do you want to do Inspiration Falls next, or do you want to do butterflies?
I got butterflies right here in my stomach. I'm so nervous about them. You know, I don't have any of that.
Butterflies. So we've already kind of mentioned the butterflies in the script, at least before. They are original to the Jungle Cruise from 1955. They have 12-inch wingspans, and some of them even flap their wings. They're mentioned a couple different places.
Kate, how do you skip that? How do you skip that? You set up the joke and you didn't say it. Their wingspan is 12 inches, which makes them the real rulers of the jungle. Come on, dude.
I'm sorry. I've transitioned out of joke mode.
I got you. All right. Okay. Back to serious mode.
So they're mentioned several times in Disney history. They're in Trady, that's not it. Trader Sam's Tiki Bar. There's a message written by Professor Fletcher Hodges that says, Sam, beware of the giant piranha butterfly. Don't say I didn't warn you. Fletcher Hodges. So there's a little note. So these are piranha butterfly.
Is that in Enchanted or is that in Grog Grotto?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember? Because I feel like you and I uncovered a couple of things. No, you haven't been there. How was there?
I've been to the Disney World one. I've been to Disneyland one. So that's my next trip. Gotta happen. There's also, back when we had Albert Awol back in the Disney World queue, remember he was the radio announcer. He would call them aggressive butterflies. So he said, all boat captains, please be advised that there have been several reports of aggressive butterflies along the inner banks of the Amazon River. 3 guests have reported minor confrontations. To minimize the chance of future injuries, butterfly repellent is strongly recommended. So they're very vicious butterflies, apparently.
Yeah. So much so that somebody's selling repellent.
Yeah.
You know, that would be a great thing if they had it in the last aid station or in our little pharmacy cabinet if they had butterfly repellent. We should look for butterfly repellent. That could totally be a thing.
We do see the butterflies show up more heavily in this latest update. So we see them later, which we'll get to this scene a little bit later in future episodes. But I do want to mention them here because there's a butterfly connection with these monkeys at the crates at the end of the attraction. And those all belong to, oh gosh, I'm going to say his name wrong. Kon Chunosuke, I believe is how you say that. So that is a collection that's also noted in Disneyland's queue. I don't have the picture easily ready for me, but there's butterflies in the Disneyland's queue as well, which we've already talked about, that come from that collection. So the butterflies have a connection there. And then they're also in the Skipper Canteen. If you're in the meeting room for the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, there's a whole bunch of butterflies that are around like this round table. And it's kind of a funny story. I had read in a source that they were from Lillian Disney's private collection. But this is always a cautionary tale, kids. Make sure you go primary sources when you do your Disney research, because they are not. Kevin Lively told me they probably got them off of Amazon. So they are not. The ones in the Disneyland's queue are from an Imagineers former Imagineers collection. But these ones are pretty new and fake, I think. So, but there is a butterfly connection.
Mm-hmm. And the table's really cool. This is like one of the few really unique theme tables of Skipper Canteen. Yeah.
So instead of the rainbow connection, that's the butterfly connection. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for butterflies. Do you have more?
Not to be confused with the butterfly effect, which means that if a butterfly flaps its wings, we have a tsunamis somewhere else in the world. I don't think that happens, but
in the Jungle Cruise.
Turbulent waters.
That's the rapids there, the Kilimanjaro safari part. Do you have any more butterfly notes?
To catch a butterfly, you use a net and then you pinch its thorax and then you pin it up on a corkboard. That's all I got.
You're going to use that forever. Every time we talk about butterflies.
Every time I see them, I say the same exact thing because it's ridiculous.
It really is. So
okay.
Shall we move on to Inspiration Falls?
We should get inspired. Okay.
So I'm going to lift it. Good old concept art for Inspiration Falls there. This is where the original joke was, inspires us to travel deeper into the jungle, which I think we actually forgot to talk about in our Jungle Cruise joke series. But the joke now is, of course, it inspires us to go deeper and deeper into the jungle.
Do you know, that joke took me a long, long time to figure out what they were talking about. I didn't realize that it was I'm like so dense. It's like, it'll inspire you to go. And I was like, go where? I'm clearly dense. Like, I didn't realize it was a pee joke. And then I that I got that I had to be more potty.
You're in the banana troop. That should be like the first place your brain goes.
We had, pardon me, miss. We only tell highbrow humor in the banana troop.
Have you seen the wall of the banana troop?
We are not hacks. We are dressed up like little scouts. So trust me, we are, although we take our comedy very seriously. We are missing
not
a cat.
To the queue.
We're missing a cat too. There is a cat who's dressed up in a suit and tie. We need to get him back if we can.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you need to revisit the queue if you don't think that's a thing for Banana Troop, but you can go back and revisit that episode. I will say that the Inspiration Falls were originally called the Singing Waterfalls by Marc Davis. So I think that's really interesting. That's on that concept art that I showed you guys there. Just page 91 in your books if you want to follow along, perfect. Kids.
Let me go right over there.
The interesting thing about these falls is they have a very specific purpose. And it's not to look pretty, although they do. It's actually to turn your attention away from the other side of the boat. Because what's happening on the other side of the boat is the building for the Pirates of the Caribbean. So they don't want you to see it. And they didn't have a lot of vegetation at the time. They were still, organizing all the things when the ride first opened. So they're like, okay, we'll put a waterfall over here and turn everybody's attention this way so that nobody will see. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain on the other side. So it's very specifically to turn your attention away from the Pirates of the Caribbean. That's why that waterfall exists in Disneyland or Disney World, but wasn't originally in Disneyland because of its ride layout.
The Singing Waterfalls. And I had seen this in the D23. They showed this picture, but there's just something about looking at, hang on, let's start off with the model of the Jungle Cruise. Then look at Marc Davis through it basically allows him to visually look like he is in the perspective of a boat going through the Jungle Cruise to map out how the scenes would look, which I think is so ridiculous, but also amazing. Mm-hmm.
Because you can put yourself in the model without it being like a 40-foot one like they used to have, right?
Right, exactly. Just
Although
crazy.
they did make that after that. No, this is after that time because this is 1969. So this is after the 40-foot model time. And I will make a note for you, Kirk, and for other people who are maybe looking through this kind of concept art from Marc Davis. Sometimes the twinkle, twinkle.
That's the most important part.
The date it'll say 1968, it'll say 1971. That's not necessarily when this art was created. That's when that was filed with the archives or put into a file. So the stamp that says Wed Enterprises, that is when this art was filed. So don't ever get hung up on the fact that you're like, oh, this is from 1968 or this is from, no, that's just been when it was filed. So not necessarily when it was made.
Well, the only one that I would say, because it's not like that, and to showcase what Kate's talking about, there's the stamp right there. But then you also do have some concept art where Marc Davis actually would put his own date on it as well. Mm-hmm. So those ones I would trust he actually made it on those dates. But the other ones, archival purpose. Dude, I literally have this book on my shoulder. It's ridiculous.
It's so heavy.
So heavy.
We have a comment from Polly who says it's so sad that the waterfalls had 3 tiers, but the top 2 broke years ago and they won't pay to repair them. And it does look a little bit different these days than it did. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. Huh. Yeah. Do you have
you know what it is, Polly? We just lack inspiration, we still have some, we just lack most.
We have less inspiration.
We have less inspiration.
Oh, gosh. Oh, and then one more thing that we've already mentioned in the queue, but we'll mention here too, because we're talking about Inspiration Falls. It also appears on the portrait of Alberta Falls in the Disneyland queue and also in the Skipper Canteen. So that one that Rosa painted of her friend Alberta, there's Inspiration Falls is behind her. So
I feel like didn't you just have that up like 2 seconds ago?
I did not. You did. No, it's like way back in the things. Yeah.
Okay.
So Um, shall we move on to our next section?
We
Well, this one's
shall.
probably more me talking about this.
Yeah, I
Because
know
it's
nothing
the
about Indiana Jones. I don't know what that is. I've been on it 3 times, and every single time it never had a wait. And I was like, this ride's awesome. Why does nobody go on it?
Indiana Jones didn't have a wait?
Nope, not when I was there. I was able,
Was it in
and
the
I didn't.
morning?
It was, well, come on. Back in the day, I used to use touring plans, and I would print it out like a map quest. So
Look at
yes,
you. You were a
but that
touring
was
plans user.
I was a touring plans user before they had apps and things. It was straight up MapQuest. And like,
Wow.
gosh forbid something went awry and you had to alter it. I'm like, oh my gosh, my times are all, what do I do? Where do I go?
You're like, let me sit down for like an hour
Yes.
and figure out what I do next. Yeah. Oh man,
Yep.
I remember those days. Okay, so what happened with the Indiana Jones cruise? This is a really important critical piece, so we can't really skip over this section. I thought I had a whole bunch of pictures, but I don't. Maybe you can pull up some pictures of just the Indiana
Sure.
Jones queue. The course of the river changed. So this was all 1993. They changed the course of the river to accommodate the new queue for Indiana Jones. So you have to remember that the Adventureland area in Disneyland is like the smallest land. There was 1 acre that was available to the public and 4 acres overall. So it's very, very, very small area. So they only had 50 feet of frontage, which is room on the riverfront essentially, but for between Swiss Family Robinson and Jungle Cruise. And then they're like going to put this whole other attraction in the center, which is this giant one. So they had to reorganize the Jungle Cruise queue, and they did put it to Story, which we've talked about in the Disneyland queue episode. They had to make it 2 stories, and they moved it over so that they would have this entrance to Indiana Jones. And the interesting part about this queue is it was the first time in Disney history that a queue was opened as an attraction. So they actually opened this for 6 months before the ride opened. The ride was not even open yet, but they opened this queue as an attraction for guests to walk through to go see it, which I think is fascinating. And it does have a whole bunch of little hidden things in it, which we can talk about when we do Indiana Jones at some point. But the queue itself, they had to make it go. Kirk is showing you all the things that are on the inside of the queue. They basically made the show building all the way near downtown Disney. You walk really far to get to it because there was no space in Adventureland for this attraction. So the queue itself, when you're walking through it, you're just like relocating yourself to another part where they had space to put the show building. And that's what's happening there. But the queue for Jungle Cruise specifically, because you can see this attraction from the Jungle Cruise and vice versa, this is, of course, when they changed the theme of the Jungle Cruise and the story a little bit to specifically in 1935. And they changed the look of the Jungle Cruise boats from the striped canopy, like on my ears, to the more rustic jungle safari look that we see today. That all happened because of Indiana Jones. That was the only reason. Bill Evans also was brought in to survey the trees in the area. And they've tagged 500 trees for relocation or removal. And they also removed a whole bunch of bamboo. So this was also interesting that I read, and I have to go back and look at our scripts, Kirk, because I read that they said this was the time when they stopped talking about all of the freeways being banned because they wanted to keep it in the time period of the 1930s. But it's interesting because the 1990s, when we saw a lot of those scripts that had political jokes in them and like timely jokes. So I wonder if maybe some of those jokes were more like skipper jokes that were put into, I don't know. It's very interesting because I'm getting conflicting information here. So when they redid this is, could you please, Kirk, find the crocodiles and the hornbill concept art?
Yep, got it.
So the crocodiles and the hornbill scene was originally added in 1976. So everybody thinks that, Marc Davis added most of these scenes in the 1960s, which is true. Most of them did. But there was a whole nother extra refurb in 1976. And they did some plussing and they added some extra scenes. And one of them was this one with a hornbill, which we just saw earlier with the little crocodiles around the poor little frog. It was a hornbill with the crocodiles around him. And I actually do have a picture of that, I believe, from that time period. And, oh, please tell me I have it here. I thought I had it, and now it's gone. No, where did it go? Oh, it's on my computer, but it's not here. I might have to look for it for a second. But the interesting thing is, if that hornbill looks familiar to you, it's because it was the one that was up in the rafters later in the queue. Do you remember that audio animatronic that we found in the rafters?
Yes. Yep. That's actually in...
Here, I think I found him. He's here.
He's like 2 pages later, too. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So he just moved during this time, this 1976 renovation, when they moved in Indiana Jones. They removed this scene with the hornbill, and they put him... Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. That's why I couldn't find it. It was in the book.
I got it.
So they moved him up into the rafters instead, and of course the crocodiles disappeared. But that's where that audio animatronic came from. And I was just laughing to myself. I was like, of course. I'm like, how would it come I didn't remember that? So, but yeah, so they got removed and relocated because of Indiana Jones, which is one of the things I was excited about. So
it's the little things, Kate.
It's the little things. I thought that was really cool. I will say...
It's not as impactful to me because I don't know the hornbill very well.
I know. Well, I have an interesting short little story about hornbill. So you said when we did the Jungle Cruise refurbishment in 1976, Marc had very specific sounds in his mind for these different animals, like the baboons and the hornbills that they would make. He'd been on the rivers in Africa and New Guinea, so he sat there and we'd find some sound in the library. Remember, this is 1976 or 1974, probably. We didn't have a very extensive sound effects library in those days, but he'd show me the artwork and then kind of describe what the sounds were. To be honest with you, I didn't have a real hornbill, so I had to try to find things that sounded like it might fit. He said, it should be kind of calm, like this bird is just hanging out there, and then when the boat goes by, he gets real agitated. So I found a couple of different bird sounds that did that, even though we kind of bent reality on it. So if you remember when we showed you from that episode with the Q, we show you the sound of the hornbill. It isn't actually the sound of the hornbill because they didn't have it in their collection at the time. So...
Didn't have
random hornbill facts you didn't know.
Random hornbill facts that nobody knew.
Yeah. So that's most of my Indiana Jones facts. That's what happened in that section of the river. They kind of did a few small additions just to make it look a little bit blend in with the queue, because the queue is literally sitting right next to the river that you can see both from each other. So it made sense for them to change it. So yeah, that's all I got for that.
Okay. I got nothing, so
you got nothing.
Away we go.
Away we go. Something that we found, that I found while I was looking at some pictures and things for this, I found this old picture from the queue that we had never shown before.
Yeah. This was a cool find.
Mm-hmm. So this says danger, wild orangutan, Pongo pygmaeus. Pongo pygmaeus. I promise I can say that. Keep away. And then it says ammunition at the bottom. But it is a cage where the bars have been bent apart and then kind of just tied back together with rope. So, and the wild orangutan is missing. So this might look familiar to you because they repurposed it for our man-eating plants that look like now they have escaped. They just tilted it on its side, so now it's facing the sky.
That was a really cool find. You're like, wait, I think this is the cage. And I'm like, I think I have that picture.
I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, something a little addition to our Q episode. We always are learning things, always finding new things. So I thought that was a really fun one.
Yeah, I love that one. Because like anytime that you can find things, like I know you love the Law Store that was in the queue and now is all the way at Trader Sam's gift shop. I love that they reuse and put it around. Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, I don't know if I knew that when we did that episode. So I don't think I have a picture easily accessible here, but there is an oar that says lost on it that has a bite taken out of it. And we showed you that in our episode with the queue for Disney World specifically. It was in this cage when you walk in the front, and it was on the left-hand side. It would say lost. And then I found it in Trader Sam's gift shop when I was on the ride the other day. And it was like the oar is just hanging out there in the gift shop at the end of the attraction. So it was like lost and found, and it says lost on it. And it just made me happy.
And then the best part, there is a setup joke for that goes, and now for our lost and found, I mean, our gift shop. They do set it up that way too. Yeah. So, makes me wonder what other things we haven't found yet, because I know there's more. So I'm Cruise. Come on, butterfly repellent. Butterfly repellent. This is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. Oh my gosh, It exists. It exists either in Skipper Canteen, in RQ, in the new butterfly scene with the chimps, or in the Disneyland queue. It exists in one of those 4 spots. I am certain of it. The Skipper Canteen books, maybe there might be a reference to it there. That's a possibility. It exists. Too. It is somewhere.
Something.
Thank you for listening to yet another enthralling, educational, and fun episode of Distory. I love these because we just get to deep dive into some of these geekier, nerdier things that other folks don't really want to talk about. Like, how many people want to talk about hornbills for about 20 minutes? I'm into it. I'm listening. So, and yes, we are wearing 2 shirts from walruscarp.com. Our name comes from Walrus and the Carpenter, and it says, I tell Skipper jokes. Trust me, I'm not lying. And then Kate is wearing the matching one that says, I laugh at Skipper jokes. And then both of us have jokes. I have the Biscuits jokes, and Kate has the, you have Schweitzer Falls, the old O2H joke, backside of t-shirts. So yeah.
It's really fun.
We make them and sell them. And again, thank you. So you didn't have to do anything. I appreciate it. You do this, you know, I don't ask for help. So thank you. I appreciate it. I'm learning.
They're really fun shirts. And I think we got a lot of fun comments from the skippers when we wore them in the Jungle Cruise, because they're you better laugh at our jokes.
We did. Yeah.
So that was always a good time. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the reason why they left us alone in Skipper Canteen, for hours. They were like, whatever, these people are fine. And then talk to us about podcasts and everything. Yeah, it was great.
Well, thank you, Kirk, for chatting about the Jungle Cruise with me. I always appreciate nerding out over all these facts. And thank you, everybody, for being with us on this super fun Jungle Cruise journey. Next week, we'll be talking about going into the Cambodian temple and discussing where all of that came from and the inspiration for it, and some connections to other parts today. So that'll be a really fun episode to dig into next week, and we'll continue our journey through the Jungle Cruise. So
yeah, you guys everybody. Keep your eyes and ears open, because I'm going to keep mine shut.
Yeah. Love it. All right. Well, thank you, Kirk. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. See you guys.
Bye.